Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and thank you for coming to today's webinar on the BISAC Subject Codes 2021 edition. Today's session is actually brought to you with the support of ReaderLink, which is the largest full-service distributor of hardcover, trade, and paperback books to the non-trade channel booksellers in North America. Their partners include some of the biggest names in retail across multiple channels in this market. We're fortunate today to have Connie Harbison, who's chair of the BISAC Subject Committee, as well as a longstanding employee of Baker and Taylor, to help us kind of sort through what's different and changed about the 2021 list. She's also going to include some information on topics that include how to read the list, as well as how to request an edition going forward. Connie, thank you for making the time today. I very much appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing your perspective on the last year worth of work in the Subject Codes Committee.
Thank you so much, Brian. Welcome, everybody. As Brian said, today we're going to talk about mostly the 2021 edition of the BISAC Subject Codes. And just to preface, I have some sleeping dogs here, so if suddenly you hear a big, if you hear chaos, I might put everybody on mute for a minute. So today, in addition to the 2021 edition, I'll touch on the BISAC Subject Committee a little bit. Some things about the new editions, when a new edition comes out, the timing and the elements of the new editions. The highlights of the 2021 edition. A couple hints for assigning headings. And how to request a new heading. And what should you do if you see a gap in the headings or something that you think should be there. To start, the BISAC Subject Committee, we are comprised of publishers, booksellers, distributors, data aggregators, a whole bunch of groups, some of which are represented here on this slide. And there's also others. And, we're a pretty eclectic group of people. We all have different interests or different specialties, but the one thing that we have in common is that we all love books, and we all love debating what the best subject is to add to the list. And if you are interested in joining in all this fun, that's so basically what we do is we maintain the subject headings, the merchandising themes, and the regional themes. And then if you are interested in joining us and joining in the fun, anyone who's a BISG member or employed by a BISG member company is welcome to join our meetings. And if you're not a BISG member, you can contact Brian for information on joining. And lately we've been having our meetings for the past 18 months or so via Zoom. So there's no travel into the city. So if you're a BISG member and you have an interest, I highly encourage you to join one of our meetings. And some of the value of committee membership is the subject committee, and specifically the subject committee, is you can drive discussions on changes that you think are of value in the industry. So, you can be right there. If you feel strongly or passionate about something, you can be at the meeting to argue about why or why not something should happen, to share and hear real use cases to help the committee make decisions. Somebody in my company, one of my editors might be having difficulty using a heading or understanding what a heading means. And then I can take that back to the committee and I can say, listen, this heading is unclear to editors. I think we need to, make a change to it. So it's people, people watch what's going on in their companies and, bring that back to the committee. Or you can, just bring your expertise on a subject in which your company may specialize. If you're with a law publisher or a medical publisher, we're always looking for that kind of expertise on those kind of titles to talk about. So this is our version, our edition history. And we started with version 1.0 around 1995. In 2005, we had version 2.9. After that, we started naming it the year in which the heading list is created. So right now, even though it's December, we're releasing the 2021 edition because that list was created in 2021. And for each new edition we make minor revisions to each section based on need, something, a current event we might see happening or requests that are coming in through our request form. And then we also choose major sections to make major revisions on a cyclical basis. So we may say, oh, computers, which is an ever-changing section, hasn't been touched in 5 years. Maybe we need to look at that. Or medicine, which is changes less often. We might look at every 10 years or something like that. But we try to at least go over sections that we haven't looked at in a long time, even if we make no changes to them, at least review them. And then we release the versions on an annual basis, generally in the fall. And this is the basic timeline of an edition. So this is where we are now, October to August. The committee, we've been meeting to discuss additions and changes for the 2022 edition. In August 2021, we closed the 2021 edition. And then in September, a proposal was drafted and circulated to general BISG membership. In around October, November, that proposal, once approved by general membership, goes to the board of directors for final approval. And then this is where we are now. December, the edition is released by BISG. Just a brief overview for those who are unfamiliar with the headings of what they look like. It's a 9-character alphanumeric code, has three letters and 6 numbers. And it also has a literal form, which is section name / and subheading. And that could be multiple subheadings. The most we'll go down to is 3 subheadings. So it could have a section name, subheading, subheading, subheading. Here's just some examples on the code. For example, MAT 002 040 and the literal mathematics algebra intermediate. The first 3 characters of the code represent the section. So in this example, CKB represents cooking, and 002 010 represents the literal regional and ethnic American California style. I've looked at sometimes I look at social media to see what people are saying about the list. And recently I saw someone ask about the numbering system, and the numbering system doesn't really mean anything. It, you can't read that as a hierarchical number, because the numbers, if the meaning of a heading were to change, we would assign a new code. So if sudden, like cooking regional and ethnic, American California style would never become cooking regional and ethnic Chinese, because that would change. That would be problematic for publishers. Then suddenly all their books that are coded as CKB 002 010 would have the wrong code. But if we were to just change it a little bit, say we were going to change American to United States, that doesn't really change the meaning of the code. So we would retain a CKB 002 010. And the codes are intended for use in electronic files, and the literals are intended for print or display purposes. Here's an example of the numbering system, the hierarchy. Education's probably started out, over 20 years ago with having hierarchical numbers. We see like 060, 000, 010, 020. But as literals changed, as new headings were added, because the headings we're always keep the same code, the numbering system got out of order. So, if education schools levels higher was a new heading, it would be out of order, might not fit within the numbering system. So the numbers don't really mean anything. As I said, the naming convention, the edition is named for the year in which it is created. We closed the 2021 edition in August. And this is the 27th edition of the BISAC subjects. And it should be ready for release in December 2021. So soon. You can find the entire list of BISAC codes online if you go onto bisg.org and click on BISAC codes. You can look at the codes. You can't download those codes. If you wanted to download them, members would receive, could download what we call the package, the edition package, and that would include a Word version and an Excel version. And the Excel version contains a table of inactive codes, a table of literal changes from one edition to the other. The Word version includes some usage notes on each section, not on individual headings. And it also includes all the cross references, which you would not see in the Excel version. And as I said, that's the package. So it would be the 2021 edition package, and members can request that once the edition is officially released. And then the edition will be added. The BISG website will be updated as well to reflect the 2021 edition. Each new edition of the list contains literal changes, inactivations, and new headings. And I'm going to just go over a little, if those terms are foreign to anyone or what those are. If anyone is confused, I'm just going to go over what each of those means in terms of the list, the subject list. So for literal changes, a literal change can be made to make a literal more common or acceptable term, to expand or clarify the scope of a heading, or maybe to organize headings that are similar into trees. And I'll go over a little what trees are. They could also be used if we have if we have a literal that has two things together. We can separate those two things. So one of them would retain that code and the other one would go and become a new heading with its own code. Here's an example of that. And this is where History 045-000 had its scope reduced. So it was, prior to this edition, History, Europe, Spain, and Portugal. But we changed that literal to History, Europe, Spain. And we added a new heading for History, Europe, Portugal. So in this case, publishers would have to go into titles, into the titles that have History 045 and reclassify those that are about just Portugal and to the new heading. If there's a book where it's about both the history of Spain and Portugal, you would now have to assign it 045 and the new heading. I mentioned earlier trees and branches. So level 1 would be the main topic. That's a topic you cannot use alone. You can use the general with it, but you can't use that just alone. And level 1, and so something like the general would be level 2. That would be the first subheading. Then you can go down to a second subheading to be more specific. And as far down as a third subheading to be, even more specific. Here's an example. Fiction, mystery, and detective, with mystery and detective at level 2. And if we want to talk about cozies, we can, go down to level 3. And the most specific would be fiction, mystery, and detective, cozy animals. And I'm sure I'll say this multiple times within the presentation, but you want to, when the heading that you want to use has a tree, you want to try to drill down as much as you can so you have the most specific subject. And if you assign it the most specific subject, say your book is fiction, mystery, and detective, cozy animals, you don't need to also assign it fiction, mystery, and detective general, or fiction, mystery, and detective, cozy general. You don't need a general heading when you have one as specific as, fiction, mystery, and detective, cozy animals. So you always want to use the most specific heading, and it's fine if that's, if that's the only heading. Inactive codes. So you can find the list in addition to getting the inactive codes on the BISAC, on the Excel version or the Word version. You can find those inactive codes on the BISG website. So if you go into BISAC codes, there's a link to click on the appendix of inactivated codes. And it's a cumulative list. So it has codes that have been inactivated, since version 2.0. And the way you read it is on this side, you would have the inactive code and literal. And then in the center, you would have the last edition that the code was active. And on the last column, you have recommended replacements. So for example, in 2018, in the 2018 edition, computers keyboarding, that was the last edition it was active. So when we were creating 2019, we inactivated that code. So if you have records on your database with computers keyboarding, you should change them to business 059 or computers 013. I'm not sure what those are offhand. So for the 2021 edition, this is the exciting part. We added 94 new headings, plus 4 cross-references. 85, we changed 85 literals to existing codes. And we changed 4 cross-references. We inactivated 3 codes and deleted 3 cross-references. And we added 3 new headings to the merchandising themes. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the merchandising themes, I'll mention them again towards the end of this presentation. So here's a chart of what was added to the 2021 edition in terms of section. So we added a heading to 23 sections. That's roughly half of the top level sections. For example, we added a heading to art, but we didn't add anything to architecture. Some of them, you can tell which ones which sections we really concentrated on by the counts of the additions. So, art or design only having 1 addition, that was probably a suggestion from a member. And we changed the literals in 18 sections. Again, education was a big one, history. We made a lot of literal changes in health and fitness. And just, one-offs in some other sections. Oops, sorry, backspaced. So today I'm going to look, we'll talk about education, health and fitness, history, juvenile fiction, and juvenile nonfiction. Those are the 5 sections that the most additions and changes were made in. So to start with education, in education, we created a tree for schools, and then we created 2 third-level branches under the tree. So we have education schools levels and education schools types. We took 5 existing headings and moved it into one of these trees, and we added 6 new headings. So the blue are what we added, and the black are headings which had a literal change were moved into this section. So because we created a new tree for levels, we always have to start with a general. So education schools levels general was a new heading, as in addition to education schools types general. We only had charter as a type, we only had charter schools, so we did expand that to some other types, private, public, religious. We also created a tree for teaching with a 3rd-level branch, subjects. And for this tree, we moved 10 existing headings into one of these trees, and we added 3 new headings. So we added some of the new headings we added were teaching materials and devices, teaching methods and strategies, and then we had to add the teaching subjects general. And all of the black headings were headings that were moved. There used to be a tree for teaching methods and materials, And we changed that subheading, teaching methods and materials, to teaching with the subheading of subjects. For health and fitness had quite a lot of changes, as you saw on the previous slide, but mostly it had these changes because we had a tree for diseases, and we changed that tree to diseases and conditions. We wanted to add a heading for headaches and migraines. As you can see, we added it. And we didn't think that fit very well into a section, into a tree with just diseases. So, changing it to diseases and conditions allowed us to put headaches and migraines into that tree. So all of the changes to health and fitness were a result of that, that decision. The one section where we had the most changes was history. We did quite a lot of revamping on that section. One of the first things we did was we broke India out of History 017. That was Asia, India, and South Asia. And now India has its own heading, which is History 062, Asia, South, India. And this was something we did because we felt, India has enough books on their own that, they don't have to be clumped in with South Asia. And it would make it easier for users to find books that are, specifically about India. We also expanded our Canada tree to include provinces and territories. There were all new headings. So we added seven new headings to Canada, all under a provincial, territorial, and local tree. And we had the help in creating this tree. BookNet Canada had a lot of input in the creation of this tree, just because, specifying what provinces or territories to include and how to break them apart, that was much more, BookNet Canada had the most expertise in doing that. So they guided us on this section. We also expanded the Caribbean and West Indies tree to include, we had Cuba, and then we expanded it to include the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica. And this, when we do something like this, it allows us to, we might look at history, Caribbean and West Indies general, and find it has thousands of titles, like there might be thousands of titles about Haiti or Jamaica. And, then we see a need to say, okay, well, these titles about, there's so many titles about Haiti, we should pull them out into their own heading. Some of the additional new headings that we added in history were Europe, Benelux countries, Islamic, LGBTQ+, and Middle East, Syria. Again, that was a extension of the Middle East tree, just one addition to what we already had in that tree. For this edition, we had a guest from the company Osprey, which specializes in military titles, and She was kind enough to attend one of our meetings and give a lot of feedback and suggestions for the best way to update our military section and headings to add. So we expanded the military tree significantly. We pulled out the subheading Wars and Conflicts and put that into a separate tree. So Wars and Conflicts now has its own tree, History, Wars and Conflicts. So for the military tree, we added Civil Wars with a C also heading to the Civil War. So adding that cross-reference so people wouldn't be confused, and include books about the US Civil War under that heading. We added early modern warfare, fortifications, guerrilla warfare, intelligence and espionage, land forces, uniforms, and we added, we had vehicles, so we just added, so we changed vehicles to a tree and added headings for air and land under that tree. I think we added C as well. And as I said, we created a new Wars and Conflicts tree. So we took the headings that were under military, Wars and Conflicts, and moved them just under the Wars and Conflicts tree. And in addition, we added headings on the Crusades, and several on World War II, Eastern Front, European theater, Mediterranean theater, and Pacific theater. We also created a new tree, a history modern 20th century. We already had a heading for the Holocaust, and we moved that from a standalone heading into this tree. And then we also added a heading for the Cold War. So people might look at this tree and say, oh, but there's dozens of events that happened in the 20th century. And we didn't want to create the tree and then add dozens of events that we're not even sure how many books are, which are the books that have, the events that have the most books published about them. So we were a little conservative this edition, and then, for future editions, we'll look to see where there's large amounts of books being published on what subjects, so we can see subjects where we think they need its own heading. And I think that was like the major changes to the history section. Brian, I see a lot of questions coming in. Is there any, are there any questions that we should take a address before I continue?
So I kind of had to unmute myself. I think we're okay for now.
Okay. Juvenile fiction was one of the areas where we added a lot of new headings. Just when we thought we couldn't add, there were no more animals for us to add to that tree. Someone suggested we added worms to it. So we added, so we added that. Other headings we added were health and daily living, mental health, neurodiversity, science and nature, flowers and plants, science and nature, trees and forests, social themes, activism and social justice, and vampires, werewolves, and shifters and zombies. The literal changes we made to this section were very minor. Some switching around of, where there's things with an ampersand, trees and forests, for example, we switched around the order of those things. Very minor changes like that were made to the literals. And for juvenile nonfiction, we added pretty much the same headings with the addition of volunteering. We previously had the heading juvenile nonfiction, social activism and volunteering. And we moved volunteering out into its own section, into its own heading, and changed the literal of social activism and volunteering to activism and social justice. So this is a case where publishers would have to move all of their books about, all their juvenile nonfiction books about volunteering into this new heading. So those were the sections where we made the most changes. In addition, we do receive, as I mentioned earlier, we do receive requests sometimes from people within our companies, come to us and ask for something. I'm trying to classify a book, or we had a whole bunch of books published on this and I don't see a good heading. And we also get a lot of suggestions just from, we have a form which you can fill out to make a suggestion. So we do look at those and we add headings based on, our discussions on those suggestions. So some of our miscellaneous new headings were art forgeries, design individual designers, family and relationships, parenting, co-parenting, and fiction lit RPG, which is literary role-playing game, and games and activities esports. And there is actually an esports for dummies. Other new headings included medical, regenerative, religion, pilgrims and pilgrimages, which I spelled wrong, sorry. Social science, human trafficking, young adult fiction, neurodiversity, and young adult nonfiction, neurodiversity. And if you remember earlier, I said we also added that to juvenile fiction and nonfiction. So that is pretty much the overview of the major changes to the 2021 edition. The major sections that you'll have changes to are, history, education, and health and fitness. And a lot of questions. So I'm going to go on to talk a little about some best practices for coding your title, and then how to request a heading. So one of the questions that we get quite often is, should I use multiple headings? And the answer to that is yes, when it's applicable. So sometimes with books, there's no single right subject. And you need to use 2 subjects or 3 subjects. You might think about how customers may approach your title. If your title is not about one specific thing, different customers might approach your title from different angles. They might be looking for, I don't know, say if you have a travel book about Walt Disney World, you can code that with travel, special interest, amusement and theme parks, or travel United States South Atlantic. And there might be people who are specifically looking for books about theme parks, or people who are specifically looking for books about traveling in the South Atlantic states. Another example would be if you had a book on Ted Bundy, that could go under true crime, murder, serial killers, or biography and autobiography, criminals and outlaws. Somebody might look for it in a biography as a biography. Somebody might look for it as true crime. So both of those, apply. Another book by Hillary Clinton. If you had a book of her political speeches, you could classify that as literary collection speeches and political science, women in politics. And some people might be looking for a book on women in politics. Someone might just be looking for a book on political speeches. If you just want to cover all aspects of the title, but as I mentioned earlier, the one thing you don't need to do is to add both a general heading and a specific heading from the same tree. So you wouldn't need to add fiction general and fiction romance general. You wouldn't need to add fiction romance general and fiction romance historical. As you go down the tree, you don't need the general, the most general heading within that tree. The number of subject codes that you assign to an ISBN really depends on the structure of the database, which is housing the record. So that's on the side of both the sender and recipient. So for example, if a database receives your data and you sent 3 codes, yet they only have 1 field in their database for BISAC, they're only going to take the first code. If a data sender can only take, maybe the data recipient can take 3 codes, but the data sender only has the capability to send 1. So we try to say that the first code is the most important whenever possible, because there are cases where people might only take the first one. But there's nothing in Onyx, there's no limit in Onyx on how many codes you can send. But a book might only have a single topic, and that's okay. So if you have a book on learning to knit and it's crafts and hobbies, needlework, knitting, that's what the book's about. It's not really about anything else, and that's okay to have just one subject for the book. You don't need to assign too many subjects to the title, because then your title is just going to get lost. The BISAC subject, it should be assigned based on the book's content, not on the merchandising plans of the publisher. So we have the merchandising codes, and you want to assign the most precise subjects in order of importance whenever possible. And again, the most specific is always the best. So before I move on a little to merchandising themes, are there any questions to be addressed, Brian?
Yeah, there was one question when you were given the updates about how do we define the term neurodiversity?
It's a term that is pretty broad. People could cover people who are perhaps on the spectrum or have different ways of learning. people who, perhaps have Downs, just people who think differently or than neurotypical person.
And I think it's also a reflection of how BISAC subject codes are created. We tend to pick up the language that people are using either in publishing the books or that the public is using to try and find the books. So it's not that we're defining the terms as much as we're reflecting that these terms are in greater use for different types of books.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
So we have something called the merchandising themes. Unfortunately, they're not widely used within the industry, but they are very useful, and I think they're split into 5 types now. We have I think ethnic and regional, we have event, interest group, and now we have, so say an event or holiday could be a christening. So people might say, okay, here's a merchandising code about christenings, and you could put it on any title, regardless if it's children or adults, that might be related to a christening, or something like, women, or I don't know if we have women's interests, LGBTQ plus interests. So you might have, a book that the subject isn't specifically LGBTQ plus, but the book would have an interest to to that community. So you could assign it the merchandising theme. So as I said, it's unfortunate, but a lot of people are not using these. However, we had the Independent Book Publishers Association. They came to the committee and asked us to look at ways to describe the publisher type in the metadata. For them, the size is important. It's important to many, especially independent booksellers, to know which books are being published, especially by independent publishers. So, we added these, and the, publishers are welcome to use them. And, we continue to maintain this list because, it's just an effort to get people to start using them. So if this is something that, publisher type is something that people want to see, maybe that would prompt people to start using the merchandising themes. Heading suggestions. If you have a suggestion for a heading that you want to see added, we have a form in which you can do so. You can request it. Anyone can submit a suggestion, whether they're a member of the committee or not. And, if the suggestion makes sense, we will talk about it. We do consider everything except, sometimes a request will come in and it's so vague, or, we have some guidelines for thinking about what headings should be, whether a heading should be requested or not. And sometimes if people don't look at those guidelines, and we might not discuss something as in-depth as we could. If it's too vague, or something, say, all by the same publisher, a very niche publisher, well, we might not talk about that at all. The guidelines for requesting a new heading, you want to consider whether that heading could be applied to at least 100 unique ISBNs currently in publication. So if you have 100 ISBNs with all the same title, that doesn't count. They should be different titles, and they should be across publishing companies. So you should consider whether it would be used by all publishing companies, or whether it's something that could only be used by a single publishing company because it is unique to that publishing company. You want to make sure your suggestion is neither too narrow, so there would be no books or a small amount of books published about it, or too broad where it could encompass hundreds of thousands of books. That's why you want to consider how many books would actually be published, or that actually are published and use this heading. You want to consider the 54 top level sections. We talked about those. That would be history, mathematics, science, business, and economics. And you want to determine which section your suggestion fits. Just as we do get suggestions to add a new top level subject. In order to do this, I think in my tenure as committee chair, so that's I think it's 17 years, we've done this twice, and both times it was supported by a group of publishers within that who published those types of books, and had a lot of support from them. Several people from those organizations came in and presented their case for, I think one several years ago was breaking design, was adding a new heading for design and moving some headings from art, architecture, photography, I think. So they came in and they gave examples of why they needed that, how it would help them. Several people from several publishers came in to talk about it and support that idea. If you just on your suggestion, if you say, oh, I'm going to use this example because it's a fresh example, dance should be a top level heading. We probably need many, people who published dance books and argue why that doesn't fit in performing arts, and why it should be broken out into its own heading. You also want to look to see if a comparable heading already exists. So, look for some like a synonym maybe for that heading, or maybe a broader aspect of that heading, because if a heading already exists that those titles can go under, then we probably wouldn't add something additional that's almost the same thing. And one thing I wanted to mention is, we have a form. And I said earlier that I do look at social media a lot to see what people are saying about the headings. And sometimes I see these campaigns to add something, a heading, and, you don't have to flood the suggestion form with 20 people from the same company requesting the same heading. We're going to look at the examples. If it's 20 people from the same group, we're still going to look at whether it helps the publishing company as the publishing industry as a whole, and not just that one group. And also, if you feel something is not represented, I specifically spoke about the history modern 20th century tree that we created, and where we only added Cold War and Holocaust under that. So you don't have to just say, well, this, and this are not represented under, you know, there's many events, here's 100 that happened in the 20th century. You know, you would want to say, okay, well, this event has, you know, thousands of books, so I think it should have a heading. And the BISG website has a form for suggestions, and on their website, I'm not going to link it. I have a link to that form, but I'm not going to go into it. Rather, I'm just going to show an example of what the form looks like. And you want to, when you're requesting a new heading, you want to say whether you are requesting a brand new heading or whether you want to make a literal change to an existing heading. And if you want to make a literal change, make sure you tell us what the code is for that heading. And then you would want to, if you're adding a new heading, you would want to say what the highest level section is. So what section would you expect to see that heading in? Would you expect to see it in history, biography, performing arts? And underneath this would be a field for examples. We suggest at least 10 examples. The minimum you can give is 3. And you know, the title and author's fine for the example. Shouldn't be all the same title. It shouldn't be all the titles that are in the example should not be by the requester. And there's a space for explanation. So if you want to, you know, make a case, you can do that. But we don't just, you know, we'll talk about each of these, but what you should provide for examples. We'll talk about each of these, but say you don't, you know, your examples don't meet this criteria, or your book or your suggestion, you know, we don't see 100, you know, unique titles about this topic, or, you know, we already have a place where all these books can go. It's not automatic that a suggestion will be approved. You know, we do talk about them extensively before we decide whether or not to approve something. So that's all I have for today. So there's my contact information in case anyone has any questions that they think of later. And if anyone has any questions or comments, now is the time. If they want to put them in the chat or in the questions and answers, whatever works.
Thanks, Connie, and thank you for making the time today. And I appreciate all the thought that goes into not just making this presentation, but your leadership for the committee really over the last 17 years, and your participation really going back to the origins of BISAC subject codes. I'll give folks a minute if they have any last minute questions, but you know, we're just about at time. I thought it'd be useful to let people know what the process is going forward. So the board's going to vote on Thursday afternoon this week to approve the proposed subject code list. And from there, there's work that needs to be done largely through Connie, who has a day job, to reformat the list and change each of the those I think 23 different sections that are now updated. Once that work is done, we'll then get it up to date on the BISG website and revise the package that Connie referred to at the beginning of the presentation. That will probably take us the balance of this month, or into at least into or on the verge of the holidays, and we'll send a note out to more broadly let everybody know when the new code list is available.
I see a question, Brian, from Mary Skyber.
Yep.
About when the last time that comics and graphic novels was reviewed. We have added to that section. I don't have the section in front of me. We have added to that section periodically over the years. The last time that it was reviewed as an entire section was probably was a number of years ago. I seem to remember being pregnant with my 14-year-old. So it was a while ago, but we have like looked at it and, you know, still done adds or changes to that section. So I think it's on our list to look at for 2022.
It is. Yep. It is one of the I think about 6 or 7 different sections that are either full or partial reviews for 2022.
Right. So Mary, if you have suggestions, you know, you can either use the form or you can just, you know, you can email them to my email on the screen.
And I think there's also something that you're planning to do or hope to do in 2022, which is to look at the extensive use of general categories to see if maybe there's a signal that there's opportunities to create more specific codes that would better serve those books.
Yes.
So Mary adds just a brief comment that and when it comes to comics and graphic novels, that the section has really grown, and I think you'd agree. And that's one of the reasons why a periodic soup to nuts review is useful.
Right.
So, well, Connie, thanks again for making the time today and for your leadership on the committee. We really appreciate it. And thanks to the ReaderLink for sponsoring today's session.
Thanks to everyone who hung in there the whole session.
I think it's really worthwhile. There's a lot of detail in all aspects of subject codes. When you've got more than 5,000 codes, there's no rushing through it. And I think that for folks who are interested, who are not already on the committee, if you do have an interest, take a chance at sitting in on a meeting or two. I think you'll get a really good sense of the level of detail and consideration that goes into both creating and maintaining the BISAC subject codes on an ongoing basis. Thanks again, and we'll see you again shortly at a BISG webinar.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.